and welcome to part 3 of LHC Virtual Assistance Chats with the One-to-One Diet by Cambridge Weight Plan with Renee and Bruce. Bruce Elliott, thanks for joining us again today. Over the last few blogs, we have spoken about the One-to-One Diet by Cambridge Weight Plan, but this time, let's find out more about Bruce. Bruce, can you tell us when you first realised that you had an issue with your weight?
Well, childhood was normal as far as I was aware. I attended local school with my brother, who was 2 years older than me, and I lived at home with my parents and an elderly grandmother who passed away when I was 7. I first became aware I was overweight when I was 11. I was very keen in cricket and played for a local minors team, as in that's a young team, not as in coal miners. And when my parents told me that if I lost a stone, they would buy me a set of cricket pads. I never thought I was overweight, but I did try to lose weight, and I did lose weight. I don't know how, and I don't know how much, but I did get my pads from my parents. I think they gave me it for trying pretty hard to lose weight. Then I carried on as before, but I didn't think about my weight continued to increase until I realised I needed larger clothes and was not the quickest at running. I became breathless easily, but my mum said that was because I was bronchitic. That was good enough for me. In these days, 1958 approximately, ladies apparently used to have what they called sewing bees, when 3 or 4 women, usually from the local church, would get together and they'd go around each other's house on a rotational basis. When it was the turn to come to our house, as in all the houses, the hostess provided some sort of, tea, as in like, sandwiches, cakes, biscuits, wee fancies they'd maybe baked, etc. And of course, I would usually help my mum to do that. I got a few bits and pieces of cakes and things there, never thought anything about it. I had a very, very sweet tooth. However, I used to make the pots of tea when they were there. And of course, I would take them into them in the sitting room, the room you only used for high days and holidays. And I was always invited, why don't you just stay now? We've finished the general chit chat. So I would stay there. When they'd eaten enough, I was always encouraged to have another bit of cake, Bruce. It's all right. Here's a couple of biscuits. You would like these. Being polite, as I thought, and being a greedy person at times, I thought I had a cake first, and then usually a few biscuits, etc. And there weren't many things left on plates when they all went away. I didn't think about being overweight until during the summer, when I was a regular at the local pool, and I noticed that I was a lot heavier than others in my class. I said this to my mum, but was told you always put on a wee bit of weight when you're growing up. You stretch, and then you put the weight on so as you can stretch all right. This was accepted as far as I was concerned, because in those days, you accepted what your mum or your dad told you. That was just the way kids were then. They did what they were told when they were told. And that's when they first realised there was anything like that.
How has this impacted on your earlier years then?
When I look back on this, my earlier years, I realise that lots of things were affected. I was keen in rugby at school, very keen in rugby, but I spent the first 2 years as a permanent reserve. Never getting on the pitch. I ran the line and I started to hear comments about me being fat, usually when people thought I was out of earshot. And this led me to what I now know was comfort eating of cakes, biscuits, chips, pretty well anything, just to get over how I felt sometimes. Because 2 years is a lot of times to go to maybe 20 games in a year and never once get on the pitch to play. You weren't allowed substitutes in these days. As I progressed through school, I discovered girls and would regularly go with schoolmates to the local youth club dances, but I lost count of the number of times girls, admittedly a lot thinner than me, didn't want to dance. Latterly, I would just go to listen to the music and hope maybe one of them would say yes. I used to cycle to the outdoor swimming pool about 4 or 5 miles away, and on the way home I would buy a bag of chips, 4 old pence. Today, a bag of chips was 2 new pence at that time. You could also get a 6-penny bag then, which would be 3 or 2.5 new pence nowadays. I get fed up with the jibes I would get. So because I was fat, I would get it in first before people would say to me, "You're fat." It was the easiest way to deal with it. I usually found if I could make people laugh then, I didn't get half the ribbing. When I said to my mum, she said, "Don't worry, teens often put on weight," and she would give me a biscuit and something like that. So of course I thought, fine, got a biscuit. It's like the dogs, reward Pavlov's dogs, moan about your weight and you'll get a biscuit. I realized I was pretty big in 6th year because in school, when I needed a new blazer, and our school used to have basically crimson blazers and the crimson rugby jersey, the local stockist in the town didn't have them in my size. So my dad and mum took me up to a tailor's, I think it was Jackson's, the tailors in Glasgow, where they could get a blazer made for me in the school colours. So that this was halfway through 6th year. So that when the 6th year was over, I could dye the blazer black and then still have a good blazer to wear because it didn't get a lot of use. And the rugby jersey, the tailor looked up, he must have been keen in rugby, and he found a team down in Wigan that played in the same colours that our school team played in. So my dad arranged for me to get a jersey from them, and I was quite happy about that. But with regard to clothes, there was no way I could buy anything off the peg. If you went to C&A's and you bought a pair of trousers to fit your waist, they always presumed you were a full fit. You know, and the one thing I didn't have was a giant backside. So if you put these on to fit your waist, the backside was hanging down at your knees. So it was always very embarrassing at times and things like that because you couldn't go anywhere else. The one suit I did have, my parents bought me it when I was over in Ireland and we found one that fitted me. You could only wear white shirts because the collar size usually stopped at 17 and a half. I was a 19. And remember, you're talking here about 64 to 68. You didn't get coloured shirts in that size that you could fasten the neck if you had to wear a tie. So I suppose I became very jealous of all my friends, wearing all the colours they would, latest fashions, everything like that. And I've got a sort of a t-shirt, usually white, maybe black, because that was about the only 2 colours you could get. And they're going about in all these gaudy colours, changing every time, and you're thinking, what do I do? You know, and you did get, I suppose I must have felt, I suppose today, nowadays, you'd say you were depressed, but I wasn't really. I just got, well, that's the way it is. I can't get anything for that. I still had friends, because I could give a reasonable performance at most sports. Therefore, I was always quite popular to be in a team. But the downside of that, if people remember back to when they were young, you'd maybe have about 15 or 12 of you, and you'd have 2 people, right, you lead that team, you lead that team. And then they would pick the players for their team. I'll take this one, you take that one. I was nearly always the last one to be picked. Yeah, I was actually quite good at the sports I was doing. You know, really. I mean, at one time I was told to practice my golf and go and enter for the North of Ireland Boys Championships. So I must have been quite good. And I seemed to be able to put in a reasonable performance at most of them. I think though, because I was quite active at sports. I mean, I enjoyed rugby, I enjoyed rowing, I enjoyed tennis, I enjoyed cricket, I enjoyed golf, that my weight didn't really bother me because I was still able to do all these things. But I didn't realize any of the problems that it could lead for me in later life. I'll talk about that another time. But a few of the friends I had at school have always stayed with me. For that, I'm eternally grateful. There's one girl I grew up with in school. She and I have now been friends for, well, I'm 73 this year, so is she, from about the age of 14. We're still good friends. we still talk to each other, we still meet regularly. Okay, maybe only once a year, but you know, it's just one of these things that some people will stick with you. They don't see the fact that you're a giant, as I used to say, I was like the honey monster, giant economy size. Some people don't see that, they see the person. But the person with the weight often has a lot of difficulty in seeing the person themselves.
Thanks very much. Sorry, thanks very much for that, Bruce. That is a great insight into how you actually felt growing up, and that level of acceptance that you just end up having as well. Oh, well, that's just what I have to do. You didn't realise there was so many different changes or so many ways that you could change your life in the future. So thank you so much for sharing that with us this week, and we will speak more about how this has impacted your life later on. But thank you today, Bruce.
Okay, thank you. Thanks very much, Lisa. Cheers.
See ya.